recorded so that we can.
Yes.
That's great.
Yep. So I do record it. Yes.
And are we on?
Yep. Some people are still joining. So give me 1 second.
Wait a few minutes.
Is Michaela kind of our expert on the technology? That's really nice. Yeah,
Should got that right.
that's really nice.
She's our technology angel.
Beautiful.
Okay, Mary, you're all set.
Thanks, Kayla. Hello, everyone, and welcome to one of those mid-month book club at the center, Birchfield Penny Arts Center meetings. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Mary Kozub, and I'm an educator at the Birchfield Penny Arts Center. Our book club, which normally meets on the first Thursday of each month, except for special events like tonight's book launch, when we have the pleasure of helping launch Lawrence Spann's book, Parable of Lies, which I'm told is not a novel or a memoir, but something in between, an experiment in healing fiction, an illustration of how writing as an act of redemption and renewal actually works. One of the best parts of my job is this book club, which I have hosted for over 12 years and have greeted over 60 authors, all of whom have come from our own community, which ties into the center's mission, which is to celebrate the many talents and achievements of our own Western New York community, even if they now live in sunny CA like Lawrence does. And we're delighted that he's here. Before we begin tonight, though, I'd like to turn things over to Michaela. As always, she will explain the mechanics for this evening's program. Michaela?
Hi, everyone. So if you are new here and you want to ask Lawrence a question, you can use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to ask those questions, and I will answer them and repeat them to him on your behalf. Please use the chat section to just say general pleasantries and chats with each other. This is also being streamed live to Facebook, so if you do have questions, you can use the comment section on there, and I will be checking those as well throughout this event. This is also being recorded, but only the panelists are being recorded. And if you ever need a copy of this, if you need to leave early or have missed this event, please reach out to us and I can get you a link.
Thanks, Michaela. Now I'm delighted to introduce one of my favorite docents. I love all the docents, but like parent, we have our favorites. And Kate is one of my favorites.
Oh.
I found her at the Albright and then reeled her in to the other side of the avenue, to the Birchfield Penny Arts Center side of things. She has graciously agreed to facilitate tonight's discussion with someone she once babysat for. So Kate, it's all yours.
Well, good evening, everybody. And it is my pleasure also to introduce you to my former little charge and my neighbor in Buffalo when we were growing up, Lawrence. We call him Chip, AKA Chip Spann. So you can call him either. Assuming that no one has read the book yet, and I assume no one has because it just literally went to publication last Wednesday or Thursday, right? Late last week. Oh my God. But I did read it. I read the proof and all 490 pages. It sounds long, but it was a very quick read. I was able to do it pretty fast and furiously because there are a lot of connections, both personally and also with Buffalo. So I will give a little description of Lawrence's past. He was born and raised in Buffalo, New York. He currently lives in Santa Barbara, California, where he has lived for the past 14 years. And he's well known in the California area, as well as in North Carolina. That's where Duke is, right? North Carolina? Yeah, okay. For hosting writing workshops with adult education in Santa Barbara, Casa Esperanza, and the Cancer Center of Santa Barbara. Prior to moving to Santa Barbara, he earned his bachelor's degrees in English and health sciences from the University of Miami and Duke University, respectively. And then he went on to receive his master's degree in health sciences from Duke University, and then a Ph.D. in creative writing with emphasis on the medical humanities from Union Institute. He's hosted more than 1,000 therapeutic writing groups, and many of these writing groups were established throughout the Literature, Arts, and Medicine program called LAMP, L-A-M-P, at Sutter, that's in California, Medical Center in Sacramento, California. So he's previously compiled works including Blood on the Page and Poet Healer. But even more than that, I grew up in the same neighborhood, next door even, in the same era. Even though I'm several years older, the neighborhood was very, very tight. The era, now I'm just putting you in this context, the era was in the 1950s when America was very, very different. Before Vietnam became a bigger challenge and government deception became known, and before the turbulence of the 60s, with new awareness for need for change in women's rights, civil rights, war protests, changing us all in many, many unpredictable ways. Even the predominant art of the time was abstract expressionist, and one could say that the culture wars began in music between Pat Boone and Elvis, if that doesn't help explain. Anyway, so the book is, I was asking, what does healing fiction is what Chip would call his book. It's part memoir, part fiction, part history. There's a lot of research that's been in there, all sorts of cast of characters, part astrology, medicine, a lot of different things that you can pick up little bits and pieces when you're reading the book. So why did you, explain that, Chip? Healing.
Well, I started getting involved in the groups. I've been involved in groups for pretty much all my adult life, but I started getting involved in the writing groups because I was always writing. I was using writing as a way to deal with my day-to-day struggles, just getting up in the morning and writing. And then discovered that there was this whole idea where people sit in a circle, they write, and then they read what they write. And what I was hearing in those groups wasn't like anything I was reading, so it's kind of like I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read, you know what I mean? That I wanted, and there was, it just cut through everything, age, race, religion. When people are vulnerable and open, and in the groups, we treated everything as fiction. So when a person read, whatever they read, we didn't apply it to their life. We applied it to, we all talked about the work as a piece of literature. I don't know if you've heard of Royard. He's a wonderful writer that wrote in the, 60s, 70s. He was a great editor as well. He wrote an amazing book called Intoxicated by My Illness. And he said all he wanted out of life from a doctor was to sit down and for that doctor to listen to him as if he were responding to a novel. And this healing fiction has become much bigger than that. It's many people think all the work that Freud did was all about this healing fiction. He was writing novel type of stuff to keep it interesting, to keep it rich. And the story is richer than the reality, if that makes any sense. So that's what I'm trying to do with A Parable of Lies. And certainly the other books as well. I was collecting poems from all over the world in Poet Healer, and then Blood on the Page is just 100 people that were in the writing groups allowed us to in the writing groups. Yeah. So that would be a summary of it. And I basically was trying to read something that I was trying to write something I'd like to read. That was the goal. Yeah.
Well, it is an enjoyable read, I have to say that. And there's also, for you Birchfield people, a connection with Charles Birchfield himself. Birchfield is known for his journal writing. Chip will talk about his, and his conventions of emotion. Chip uses like little, instead of cryptograms, he uses like little lines to get people thinking about different things. He has a love of nature. He sees nature as a cathedral. He has the angst at having to work while he's also wanting to write. And it's kind of funny. I think, well, Birchfield uses paint. I consider Chip using words as painted pictures.
Wow.
And this will bring me, would you read the piece about the house,
Oh, sure.
please?
Let me find that. Walking through the house, right? That area.
This just gives you an idea how a writer can create a picture.
Yeah,
With
and this
words.
is also a common writing exercise where we have someone kind of go into a little quiet space and then go into their family home where they grew up and describe everything in the home. This is a very long section, so I'll just read a little bit of it to give you a feel of it. The pièce de résistance was behind the bar, a large framed sepia-toned photo of my grandfather, his right foot on the running board of a 1927 Pierce Arrow Roadster. Buffalo Pharmaceutical, his business, was displayed above him in the background. I leaned over the counter, steeped in my brother's paraphernalia, studied my grandfather's face. Stained t-shirts, empty prescription bottles, expired coupons, and stacked videotapes formed a barrier. My grandfather was much younger than I had known him. He seemed smug and well satisfied with himself. His eyes were intense. He sported a turned down smile, concealing his teeth. Dressed in a three-piece suit, bow tie, tilted fedora, and gold chain, he looked dashing. His wide-legged, baggy trousers emphasized the angle of his bent leg. He wore brown and white two-toned shoes. In his left hand, he held a cigar between his index and middle finger. It had a white plastic tip. Buffalo was booming, experiencing the most beautiful American bubble. There was no sign it was ever going to pop. People flocked to Western New York for jobs, to raise children, and to put down roots. My grandfather was confident at the height of his powers. Trains, ships, trucks, and automobiles bustled in and out of the burgeoning city. Frank Lloyd Wright, Lewis Sullivan, and Henry Hobson Richardson came to Buffalo. The trinity of American architecture glorified the skyline of the thriving metropolis. Little did my grandfather know, this was Buffalo's most significant era of prosperity. And then Neal, the narrator, Neal Motherwell, walks into the living room and goes on to the next thing. But he's seeing different things in the household and then kind of, just allowing himself to riff and go deeper. I compare it to a skipping stone. When we skip a stone, it skips, and then it dives deep. So that's the concept of this kind of writing. Just allow it to go where it wants to go.
But it also has like a story form too. So that's the novel part of it. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's divided into sections. So the beginning is sort of the introduction. I don't want to give it away because people haven't read it yet, but it starts out with a female voice finding being given a manuscript, and then of a father that she didn't know she had. And then then it goes into the novel itself, which starts with the father, his life story, because he wrote the journal. So I don't want to confuse anybody about that, but I also wanted to say too that so it starts like in your present time, and then it goes into your past, and then it goes into a healing section. So there are like all different sections that all kind of intertwine. But they're also,
you really did read this book. Okay.
I did read this book. I told you I read it.
But I'm thrilled with your summary. It's great. I do have another little snippet about the walking through the house. Do you want me to do that as well?
Well, actually, can I just ask you about this? I wanted to say Buffalo is a character in your book.
Oh, very much.
I think, that's the way I look at it. And so you talk a lot about it. And so how do you look at it that way, or what do you think?
Oh, very much. Yeah, very much. To be a Buffalonian is always to be a Buffalonian. I'm never not from Buffalo wherever I go, whatever I do, whoever I meet. When I meet Buffalonians, it's in your soul. you know,
Uh.
very much, yeah. And until I really accepted that about myself, you know, life got a lot better for me when I accepted that about myself, that this was home, this is where my roots were.
Right.
My
They have
family, generations, yeah.
Buffalo has a huge diaspora all over, you know. Is there a Buffalo club in Santa Barbara? I mean, you watch the Bills, right?
Yeah. There's a group that gets together and watches the Bills whenever the Bills play. Yeah, there's about, oh, I'd say 20 of us that get together.
Wow.
Yeah, they're
I
very,
always,
very close.
I always laugh and say Buffalo is more like Ireland than Ireland.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, after both Chip and I left home in Buffalo, we both had our own education outside of Buffalo, and we reconnected in Ireland, believe it or not. A total fluke. He and his wife were visiting, and they were down the street from where I lived, and we got together. And then they came back another year for a literary festival.
Yeah. Well, that was at your suggestion, which was wonderful. Yeah, I was doing my doctorate at the time, and we came and spent a week at Kirch. Remember, is that how I'm pronouncing it?
Porch. Yeah.
Kirch,
Yeah.
which was fabulous, you know. Yeah.
But it is interesting how lives intersect and interweave, and that's exactly what his book does too. But going back to Buffalo, would you read the section on, do you have it on Scajaquada?
Oh, sure. I'm glad I wrote down.
It's very timely today. We're all.
Yeah, let's see if I can find it. The book starts out with Neal and Victoria, his wife, going off on a gallivant. They're going to Palm Springs for Christmas. They both have their families have been left behind, and they're really excited because they're just going to be the two of them traveling together, and they're going to have this wonderful week, you know, in Palm Springs, just to be together and be away from all, you know, work and all the stuff that goes on in life. So unfortunately, what happens is Neal's brother dies, and Neal had been very too connected to this brother. You know, they're on the phone all the time and constantly involved with one another. But he's an alcoholic. He dies, and it changes everything. So Vic and Neal have to fly to Buffalo in the middle of winter. So this is on the 26th, 27th, something like that, of December. And so anyway, Victoria's a Californian, fourth generation Californian. So there, he says, the road was bumpy with chunks of ice and potholes. Vic pointed at a sign, Sacramento Expressway, and said, "How do you say that?" I sounded it out, Sacramento. She puffed her lips. Sacramento. What a strange name. What does it mean? It's named after the creek that runs through here, a Native American name. Like Yosemite? I nodded. How does anybody remember how to pronounce it? They can't. My father, who lived here all his life, never got it right. He called it Skadakity, which always got a laugh. The bigness of the day was upon us, a blustery wind, a massive rolling dome of glooming clouds. It was frigid, still, and dark, like Red Square in winter. I wonder what Vic thought of this jumble of Buffalo historical landmarks so familiar to me. I wished I were young again, nothing behind me, everything ahead. How many times had I traversed the Sacramento? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Now this worming erosion, a road to nowhere, was to be seen anew through her eyes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
I also thought too that everybody in writing, everybody in life has a trauma. You know, everybody has a trauma, no matter what it is. And as you started saying, it was mixed death. And you want to read a little section about that? What brought you back?
Sure. Yeah. The person who's writing, Neal Motherwell, is a feverish writer. I mean, he'll put thousands of words. So the idea is this is all writings from a notebook. He's writing feverishly, getting up at 4, 3, 2 o'clock in the morning to do his writing. And anyway, so this is the shortest section, and it's purposely this shortest section because, you know, it's such a painful memory and such a difficult memory for him. So every little section starts out. This is 26 December, 4 a.m., Palm Springs, California. And then there's a little quote at the beginning of each section as well. And the one at the beginning of this one is, and these are meant as prompts, that might help others. Very interesting. I had a friend from England actually get a hold of the book, read it, and suddenly he sent me an 8-page short story about how he was mistreated when he was in boarding school in England, and that was his response to reading A Parable of Lies. So that was exactly the response I hoped for. So yeah. So anyway, here's the little quote that starts this section. A constriction in the chest, tears, a scream that feels as if it would be endless if I let it out. And that's Susan Sontag, 1933 to 2004. So it'll give you the author and kind of their dates. Last night, the phone rang at 9:23. Vic in bed, I fumbled in the dark and caught it before the second ring. Mick's dead. He had a heart attack, Pixie said. I took a deep breath and sighed. She said, I just couldn't go on. Then she broke down and sobbed. I produced no words. Instead, I listened more intently to my brother's fiance than I had ever listened to anyone in my entire life. She raised her voice, bawled and screamed, no words at first. I waited. She took little energetic breaths like a choo-choo train climbing a hill. Eventually, she spat out, Mick woke up. The fucking nurse told him. She asked him if he wanted the stump dressing changed. Blubbered. It would have been better if she didn't wake him up at all. How did he take it? How would you? He was groggy and confused. It sucked. I'm sorry. It was awful. I was in the room. Why didn't that goddamn nurse let me tell him? I said, sometimes health professionals are insensitive. She blurted, I didn't want him to know. I said, it was good you were there. Mick knows that. I held my breath and she continued to cry. Why didn't Cassie call? I said. This is Neal's sister. Why didn't Cassie call? She asked me to do it. I asked, what time did Mick die? Sometime this morning, I'll call her. What are the plans? She'd already hung up. Victoria sat up with sad eyes and faced me. We'll buy jackets at Target and leave the car at LAX. I said, shit, you knew this was going to happen. Why didn't I listen? I wanted something better to happen. She nodded. Something better happened. That he died? You know, it was getting harder for him. Mick lost his foot. He couldn't go on. I didn't want him to die. She said, I don't believe anything happens after death. There's no heaven or hell, no angels, no reunion with family and friends. We're gone. That's it. Something better. That's the place we all come to when our bodies wear out and it's time to let go. Everybody reaches it, a place where it's better to die than go on with the soul. I said, but I thought he'd stop drinking, get healthy, and make a triumphant return to Good Morning Buffalo. It didn't turn out that way. Sometimes nothing goes as planned. I miss him so much. What about him? Did you want him to go on with his suffering? We held each other in the darkness, Vic in her body and me in mine. We are the body, need the body, live through the body. What's it like on the other side? My dear, sweet, and fucked up brother is dead. I hope he wasn't alone and scared. I can't help him anymore. When does it become better to choose death than life? Our chest rose and fell. I felt angry. Why wouldn't Mick stop drinking? There were no words. A pain so deep and sharp settled in my chest. Vic placed her right palm on my sternum and said, I can feel your heartbeat. It's steady and strong. She drifted off and I got up and laid a bathroom towel on the carpet. From memory, I went through my yoga sequence. Sun salutations, backward and forward bends, twist, a shoulder stand, a headstand. I saw a flashing light in the back of my right eye. Then I agonized the rest of the night and into the morning that I detached my retina. My brother is dead Christmas morning, and he expired a full half day before anyone let me know. Why didn't Cassie call?
I think so many of us have gone through similar situations, being, even if you're at home, you have a death of somebody that's very close to you in your family. And it is very, very moving. And it is something that really takes a lot out of everybody and changes them.
Yeah, well, in this book, this is a long distance relationship. Neal has been long gone from Buffalo, his whole adult life, and his connection, he's tethered some way to this brother who is, deeply alcoholic, dying, struggling, but, they talk. It's kind of a 24/7 thing, they're on the phone all the time. So they're deeply, deeply connected, but they don't see one another. It's a kind of a telephone relationship. Yeah.
Mhm. I think many families are like that. I really do. I think once you leave Buffalo, it's kind of hard. Your heart is still in both
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, like
In fact,
Mick
at
will
what
call him. I was just saying, Mick will call him at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. That's a typical situation. That he's just on the phone all the time.
yeah. And it is hard for our partners who are still, with us, who
It's
aren't
miserable.
part of the family.
Yes.
So it's something for all of us. So healing writing. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your lifelong journaling and how the process, how you started and how it led to working in medical groups.
Oh, sure. Well, it probably started at Bennett High School. I used to get very uptight, worried, anxious because I was a swimmer, and I would, I actually was an all-high swimmer, and I would literally go through the race in my head, every single stroke, every turn, every breath I would take, the distance I was swimming, and I started writing about that process, early on. I was already writing even as a youngster. There's a story in the book where Neal writes EGG, and then his mother makes him breakfast with an egg. That some way he learns how to shape letters, and by doing that, get what he wants. But it's really stunning to him that something he does on paper actually can create something outside. He doesn't need to use his voice. He can actually write something down and move forward. So, the Bennett High School thing, I used to write, just use writing as a way to kind of, like some people might use meditation or listening to music. And then it just kept growing and growing and growing. And in college, I was an English major and lots of terrific teachers. And I was actually an African-American literature study person, believe it or not. That was my major in college. And I just met all kinds of great people along the way. And the journaling, just became a way of life. Yeah. And so I'd say the last 25, I generally write every day, it's a really important part of my life. Today I woke up, getting a book published, it's kind of a little bit between suicide and elation. You know what I mean? You run the gamut here because you get so much feedback and crazy things happen. And yesterday was a particularly difficult day. When I woke up, I wasn't sure, am I really ready to face the day? But when I wrote, I probably wrote 1,000 words or something. Something kind of switched, and I was able to reason through, get in touch with some relationships that had been severed, which were just difficult and problematic. And yeah, what I'm saying, it's an amazingly powerful. It's been scientifically proven as well, but I'm just saying, for me, living a whole life doing it, it's kind of a boon. You fill a lot of notebooks, and that's what Neal does in the book. He fills a lot of notebooks. Yeah.
How did you get from, you were working as a paramedical, right, at Duke? How did you start writing programs then? How did you move into that?
Well, how did that happen? Okay, so basically I graduated from the University of Miami, and I was lost. I came back to Buffalo for a while. I went back. I worked in Brooksville for a while with children, emotionally disturbed children. I worked on Delaware Avenue with the Child Care Center. I was the night man at the Child Care Center. But even then, I loved that job so much is because I could read T.S. Eliot throughout the night. I could read, James Joyce, and it was just a wonderful, place. But obviously that doesn't last forever. And I had lots of jobs during those periods. And then I ended up in Florida with my first wife. And there, really, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was a mess. I was overweight and blubber. But some way, I was reading, of course. That was the big part of my life. I'd been a swimmer in high school, and I went and became a lifeguard on the ocean and got in really good physical shape. And then from there, at the time, they were recruiting paramedics from ocean lifeguards. And I became a paramedic, which was a big jump for me because I was totally an English major. I'd never taken a science course in my life. And from there, believe it or not, I jumped to Duke. I worked for a fire department. I was a fireman paramedic. And the doctor who was in charge of medical group, he paid for me to go to Duke University. He said, if anybody can get into Duke, I'll pay for them to go to Duke because I'd like to see somebody become a physician assistant. And these were days when physician's assistants were not that well known. You know, I mean, it was a small field. I didn't even know what one was when he brought it up. That there's a story in the book about him.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I brought it up.
But once I got to Duke, then, you know, that whole nother world. I started, I got very involved. I was the program director of the heart rehabilitation program, and he got very involved with the national stuff around that. But there was always the writing, always the want to be writing, you know, and this book is just a manifest. As I told you the other day, you know, I had to write it. I mean, there was no way it was not going to be, I mean, whatever, this was a need, you know, this was a conclusion. I mean, some people have, you know, want list to, you know, bucket list to go to New Zealand or something, but no, this is write the book. And it's, you know, obviously a bigger task than I imagined.
I'm going to add too, it's a self-help coming of age book. There are just so many different little bits and pieces that you could put into it. And I also know,
coming of old age, yeah.
What?
Coming of old age.
Coming of old age.
It's our generation, you know, coming of where we are now. But
Right,
I think
yeah.
it would be valuable to younger people as well. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I know when you think about it, I think of all the jobs that I had, and I'm sure many in your audience have done the same. And how sometimes you say, how did I end up here where I am? And I know when you're also young, you always have these dreams. Read a little bit about your dream of going someplace else.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a good story. I remember I read this the other day as well.
And I love this, yeah.
Well, the story is about Neal is actually in kind of a fever at this point. His mental health deteriorates tremendously when his brother dies. Suddenly, he's been balkanizing all these feelings. You know, Buffalo has been kind of out there, you know, kind of what happened in the household they grew up in, you know, what that was all about and how that affected him emotionally. And he had rejected all of that. So this is him reflecting on back at his life when he lived in Florida when he was an ocean lifeguard. And his goal with his first wife was to get to New Zealand. If they could only get to New Zealand, life would be fantastic. It would be wonderful. He had become a paramedic with the idea of becoming a paramedic in New Zealand and, you know, living a full life there. So basically they save up all their money and they spend 10, 12 weeks in New Zealand, but unfortunately it's very, very cold. It's the summer. She's a school teacher, so gets the summer off, and they end up in New Zealand when it's frigid and there's no central heating except like at the public library. So basically, they start to decide maybe this isn't for them. You know, it's a real rough landing in New Zealand. But there's one moment in particular where he decides that it is time to come back to America and to choose America in a certain way. So I'll read that. Not helping matters. Our summer down under is winter and frigid, more cutting than we ever expected, and it dragged on and on. It was rare to find central heating. Shivering, we often sought out public buildings like the public library for warmth. We deflected plans to explore South Island job opportunities and spent those valuable weeks in the Bay of Islands seeking radiant heat and sunshine. We found that the Bay of Islands is a picturesque vacation district devoid of employment opportunities except for picking kiwis. We made lots of friends and people were ever supportive and helpful, but both of us wanted to come home. Our New Zealand interlude proved to be a dalliance, not a geographical cure. It was clear we wouldn't stay, and the turning point was The Last Waltz, a film we'd already seen in Florida that came a year late to New Zealand. At the time, everything took months and months to get there, and some pop culture milestones never arrived at all. A few weeks before we left, we joined a rowdy crowd at a bar in Auckland. A single tube of white light cut through the smoke and darkness and projected the film on a white sheet draped on the wall. When patrons stood to get a beer, their shadows blocked the screen. No one cared. The vamped up electric sound system filled any gaps. For me, the effect of seeing the band on stage at Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco was hypnotic. Everybody in the pub wished they'd been there, hooting and howling for each super act Robbie Roberson brought up to the stage. I swelled with pride as an American. I wanted to be in the music, not 6,000 miles away. Raunchy rockabilly performers like Ronnie Hawkins reminded me where I came from and where I belonged. When the band performed It Makes No Difference, a song to this day that splits me open, a pure wail and sad lament, written by Roberson and sung by the late Rick Danko, it expressed the emotion I felt that frosty summer in Auckland. Although my commitment to Alida, this is the wife, proved temporary, my devotion to rock and roll and America was visceral. In one line, Danko rips his voice wide open and yet, stampeding cattle, they rattled the walls. It shook my ribcage so hard, it felt like the hoofs rumbled on my heart. Levon Helm and Richard Manuel's whiny country harmonizing vocalized Americana, and Robertson's guitar teetered on edge like cocaine addiction. The penultimate saxophone solo by Garth Hudson at the end never fails to bring me to tears. My choice was to be an American, accept the chaos, the lies, the racism, the warmongering, the waste and stupidity. Not because I was born an American, but because I chose it. And this proved to be the most important decision of my life.
Thank you. So music is very important, I think. Well, do you want to take a break, or do you want me to, let me ask this one last question before we go to questions. Music is very important in the book because it's mentioned all the way through. In fact, your beautiful wife, Elizabeth, put together a whole, what do you call it?
Soundtrack or
soundtrack that you could, listen to. In fact, that's what I ended up doing. I'd hear you'd mention a song and I'd say, oh, I remember that. And then I'd go on YouTube and put it up. And it would bring back memories for me, for example, the Eva Cassidy. Oh my God, I'd completely forgotten about her. So that's the other thing that I think your book does, is bring you back into your memories through the songs that we heard.
Yeah.
What is music to you? Do explain that a little bit.
Well, it's the moving, guiding force for sure. I mean, the art form, which I don't play any instrument, I can't sing on key, but the music is is the soul. It's the moving soul force. Yeah, I mean, the whole point. I mean, even there's an amazing therapist that is introduced at the end of the book. In fact, the last couple hundred pages are all about Big Sur and this Gestalt therapist who has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. But even in her disability, she's been living with this for 29 years or something. She's in a wheelchair most of the time, can't get around, but her thing is healing music, and she calls it exact moments of healing, where she uses the music to help people solidify in themselves the emotional well-being that they got from the little session. And it's more like, I don't know, it's stage that she does. People in the group play like a parent or a mother or a grandfather, whatever. And these things are the person's allowed to feel those emotions again, but always the music kind of solidifies that. And that's been the case my whole life. I mean, it's just a natural thing we all remember, I mean, listening to Crosby, Stills and Nash the first time. I mean, there are these moments where it just changes your soul, it moves your soul. And the book, I wanted people to have a list, like songs that were being thought of while this was being created. Yeah.
Thank you. I really like that little aspect of it. Yeah. We've been talking on and on and on for a long time. Are there any questions or?
There is one. This question's from Ron Heron. He asks, so when your book finally makes it to screen, so when your book becomes a movie, essentially, will we need to have a Chilly Willy cartoon to counterbalance the seriousness of your healing fiction? Or is there enough humor in your book?
Oh, I hope there's enough humor. I mean, people that have read it, said they laugh as well as cry, and that's the That's a good question, but yes. Yeah, I mean, the idea isn't darkness for darkness' sake. In fact, I'm surprised that Ron didn't also mention that whole quote by Mark Twain that he says that all humor comes from sorrow, because that the things aren't funny unless there's some edge, to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
This question just came in from Patty Kwok. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She says, will you come to Seattle to teach healing fiction at Hugo House?
Oh, I'd be happy to, sure. Hugo House, for those of you that don't know, is Richard Hugo, famous poet. And Triggering Town is the book that he wrote that's all about how one word triggers the next, At one point, I owned about 300 of these writing books, so I'm familiar. Yeah, it's a wonderful place. Sure, I love Seattle, actually. Elizabeth gave a wonderful keynote talk there a couple of years ago. My wife wrote a book about nursing. It's called The Soul of the Nurse, and and they bought like 300 books and gave them to everybody in the audience, which was awesome.
Oh, wow, that's great. We're going to do that too, right?
Well, I'm looking forward to being in Buffalo for sure.
So those are all the Q&As so far, but if anyone else has a question, please use that Q&A section.
I know we really wanted this to be more of a conversation, about growing up, and, it just brought me back, way back, not only examining the, like the little pains, and I had a great childhood, I thought, but I mean, bringing the pains and traumas that you kind of overlook, and the music, and being a young person and having to struggle with what am I going to do with my life, and how, things, you just kind of fall into things little bit by little, and it's just really, yeah. So there are a lot of interesting moments too. It is fun. So
well, each of our lives are full of this stuff. I mean,
yeah.
people often say, like in the writing groups, I mean, I've had people with no education whatsoever, like a 6th grade education. The poet Robert Bly always says, if you just have 6 words, you can make poetry. And that I found that to be the case. I mean, people will knock you over with their writing and their stories. I mean, it's not a literary event. I mean, what I'm saying, this goes down into the gut, into the soul, and when people come forth and are vulnerable in their work, it's it's one of the greatest places to be. In the middle of something like that. It's fantastic. Yeah.
And it is healing too. It is healing. Now, what authors, thinkers, influencers, blah, 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 influenced you? Or
well, it's funny. I started with Camus. That I grew up in a household really where there were very few books. Not much going on in that way. And a neighbor lady gave me Siddhartha, by Hermann Hesse, and then Camus' The Stranger, and that kind of changed my life. In the book, Neal latches on to the California poet Robinson Jeffers, who writes just magnificently about the Big Sur coast, and so he has all these fantasies of going to California and what California would be like, and just the I don't know, the savage coast of that 90 miles, and that Jeffers writes about really turns him on. And Jeffers also, as famous as being a poet, he also built a granite house from the stones from the beach on Carmel, as well as a tower called Hawk Tower. So there's a lot of options there. And he wrote very, very raw. I mean, you can almost feel the waves and the rocks and the mountains and trees. And I try to incorporate that in the book. Pardon me?
No, I said he had a connection with our Mabel Dodge too, right?
A big connection, and that's noted in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mabel Dodge, had her place in Taos, New Mexico, and Robinson Jeffers and his wife Una used to go there and spend time, and their whole family, their 2 sons loved to ranch, and then there's events there that are recounted in the book historically that are will kind of blow your mind, Yeah. I won't give anything away here, but there's quite a story, quite a connection between those two. Mabel knew everybody. I mean, she was a phenomenal person.
Yeah, we had an exhibit here of Mabel. Birchfield did a couple of years ago. Yeah, our own.
Well, she was one of the great journalists. She would be like Neal Motherwell. I mean, she supposedly, there's lots of stuff that still hasn't been published. Yeah.
Oh, it hasn't been, really?
Well, I mean, she has journals. Maybe it's not really publishable stuff, but I know they held back on publishing some of it because it was thought to be a little too raw. They waited till she died to move forward.
Right, yeah.
But
You
she's overwhelming. When I get into reading her, I can't, there's just so much. I mean, how do you even start with it?
I know. I hope we're not going all over the place because people haven't read it. I hope you're getting some little idea. Also, I have to laugh. I asked him for a bibliography of Buffalo. 53 books he read on Buffalo. 53. So he's probably you're probably more an expert on Buffalo than any of us are.
Well, it was kind of part of my healing, as I had to learn about where I was from. We often are from a place that we don't really study much. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah.
And I got a lot of help from the historical museum. They actually turned me onto books and people who were writing books that I didn't know about. And you did too, Kate. You were always coming up with some new author from Buffalo.
Yeah, I know. It's funny in our little conclave of streets, we have all these people who are interested in, I don't do any of the arts, but I'm interested in them. I'm just trying to think if there's any other, how about you do To Live and Die by Buffalo?
Oh, sure.
We didn't do that one, right?
Yeah, Mick is the brother of Neal, and basically he will go nowhere but Buffalo. He's a chef and he's been offered jobs in Hawaii and all over the country, but he will not leave. Buffalo is the beginning and end of his world. Bad luck and bumbling are my hometown's fate. Excuses and complaints. It's the city consigned to the art of premature ejaculation. It has earned a reputation for bad weather in Bush League. A blizzard swept town center smacked in the middle of the Great Lakes wind corridor. Coined in the 60s by a sports writer, the moniker Armpit of the East stuck to Buffalo. In the 90s, when the Bills lost 4 consecutive Super Bowls, pundits mocked it. And when the team stopped winning, they ignored it. Buffalonians hate ridicule, but irrelevance is much worse. It's a place always trying to prove its worth, a mindset of significance. Thus the term Buffalo Curse, and it started with McKinley in the Pan Am. Through the years, when I say I'm from Buffalo, strangers quip, Buffalo's a good place to be from. Even if they've never been there, they offer, get a lot of snow up there. Why do Buffalonians like my brother live and die by Buffalo? As I meandered through Delaware Park, I realized that I did too.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
So the names, where did you come up with the names? Because I immediately thought of like Neil Cassidy, in the Beat Generation.
Yeah. That's like the end of the book. Yeah.
And the end of the book, when you're at Big Sur, it just seemed like there were a lot of Ginsberg and, all that whole crowd.
Yeah, the writing that I do all have a literary component to it. I come in and learn about some literary figure because the real goal, healing and writing, is finding a soul poet. Does that make sense? Someone that, I mentioned Camus, who was, kind of my beginning, Hermann Hesse. These are people that some way you admire them, in their lives and what they've done with their lives and their writing, even Henry Miller, I've read everything he ever wrote, Kerouac, et cetera. But there's something about it where it's what the reader brings to the writer that counts, what I mean? It's how it changes our lives. I think, I don't know if I have that quote handy, but it's really an important quote. Yeah, here it is. This is Franz Kafka said, I think we ought to read only the kind of books that wound or stab us. If the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? We need books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us deeply, like the death of someone we loved more than ourselves, like being banished into the forest far from everyone. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And I think that kind of captures it, that for me, that quote. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so we have a couple.
Good.
This one is another one from Patty. Can you address the timing of writing the introduction, which really solidified your story since the early read in April 2020?
Oh, yes. Well, Patty was, I'm so grateful to Patty. Patty actually read the entire book while I was writing it, you know, which is really a hard thing to do because the book is taking shape. You don't know where it's going. It's very difficult to see beginning, middle, and end. So thank you, Patty, for doing that. And more than thank you, it's a hard thing to do. But you know, she was there throughout the years that this has taken to put all together. Yeah, I got an editor about a year and a half ago, and she just suggested we need an introduction to the book. And what I thought she wanted was something like there's a tremendous amount of literature. Like when I was doing my doctorate, I studied all the scientific studies that show that writing is beneficial. It increases the immune system. You know, that kind of thing is where I thought I would go more into the statistical content. And then there's an episode at the end of the book where Neal has an affair with a woman at a medical meeting. And I thought, wow, you know, that might be the story where there's actually a child produced who doesn't know him. And she finds the book, and then she some way comes in as an objective observer and talks about what writing is and what writing can be and how writing can stimulate, you know, us to grow and move beyond ourselves and get beyond our anxieties and fears and just the difficulties of living, you know. Yeah. So that's how that came about. And that voice, I don't know, her name is Cordelia Howell, and she's 28 years old, and you know, she tells the whole story about, well, not the whole story because the story's in the book, but she kind of tells what, from her point of view, first of all, what it's like to be a child who doesn't know their real father. You know, that she's one in the 25 people that don't know their father. And she calls that the parable of the lie. So, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of, she kind of gets the reader hopefully into the rhythm of what the book will lead them to, you know, when they get to page 470 or something, or I don't know where that episode is, but somewhere near the end of the book. Yeah.
Show the cover of the book because I love the cover. Parable of Lies. Tell me about the color. Tell us about the cover.
Oh, well, that's fun to talk about. Yeah, and there's pictures throughout the, you know, that same art is pervasive. Each section of the book has its own. My favorite section is the buffalo section, if I can find it to show to you. But yeah, I had been working on covers by the thousand, it seemed. I couldn't find, I'd actually bought art, you know, pictures of the Peace Bridge, you know, back in the 50s. A guy was painting a buffalo for me, you know, to put on the cover. And it was just weird. Yeah, this is my favorite section right here. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, that's a Peace Bridge?
That's the Peace Bridge. And that's the beginning of part 2, which is about Buffalo. You know, that gives you a sense of, you know, just the awesomeness of that river. And the river's talked about throughout the book and all the water that comes through and, you know, how dry it is in California and how wet it is there. But the cover is a mistake, as is the title. The title came in a dream. I'm not sure where from. And the cover I was walking to the gym like I do at 5 o'clock in the morning, and my iPhone was basically on selfie, and it took a selfie of me with the big 30-foot lamp, you know, street lamp behind me in the dark. And when I saw it, I said, that's the cover. But that was after maybe making 74 other covers. I mean, you know, it was years in the making, because I was, whenever I couldn't write, I would make covers. You know, I should have a book of covers, you know, because I have a lot of great covers of Buffalo. There's one with a little boy crossing the street with the street lamps behind him. So it's kind of a Holden Caulfield thing, you know. It's really a good cover.
Oh, you should make a book of the covers. I think that's.
There's another cover of just a shadow, you know, just a shadow on a wall at sunrise. Yeah. But I mean, there are many beautiful pictures of Buffalo. I mean, really, you know, those magnificent things you see in the Buffalo News. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the story of the cover and the title. Yeah. And they're accidents. Yeah.
Linda asks, how did growing up in Buffalo impact your writing?
Well, I think it's all about Buffalo. All the images in my mind, you know, those streets, Elmwood, Forest Avenue, the Big David in the park, Olmsted, you know, I mean, I didn't know that till I started studying the history of Buffalo, but you know, it's in me. One of the quotes I think I already mentioned was, you know, I have the quote from the sportscaster Sal Capaccio. He said, "I'll never not be a guy from Buffalo." You know what I mean? That's, and I think we have to accept that. And I think everyone has their Buffalo. You know, once I got that down, it made a lot of sense, you know. Yeah. But you can't reject your past. You know, you are of a place, you know, and that would be the place I'm part of. Yeah. And the
And
books
there
are
are,
written. Yeah.
there are so many people that have come back. Walk for one, you know,
Of
who've
course.
left and come back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great because I stay in touch with them and I vicariously have my opportunities to live there in a way. You know. It's a magic place. I mean, geographically, the river, the lake, you know, the connection with Canada. Yeah, it's very powerful.
We can't get to Canada. We could just now opened up. We can now maybe get
Yeah.
after a year and a half.
Yeah.
Ron asks, will you be up here to sign copies in Buffalo in the next month or so?
Oh yeah, I'm coming back with Elizabeth, and we will be. I don't know how much signing we'll do, but we'll definitely be there. And I had hoped to get to my favorite little bookstores because whenever I go to a city, I get to know all the bookstores and like Rust City Books and places like that. And Talking Leaves. I mean, all those places I adore. And unfortunately,
Lawrence,
there's nothing happening. Yes,
Lawrence, what day will you be visiting the Birchfield?
I think
Tuesday,
September 7th. Is that right? Do I
7th.
remember that?
Will there be time? Could we set up a little time if people would like to come in and get a book signed?
Oh, sure, sure. I don't know how many books I'll bring, but
think
yeah,
we're
I've been having
closed.
trouble getting the books. Yeah, but I would be happy to sign books, sure.
We'll have to see how we can do that.
Yeah. Well, the Birchfield, you know, Birchfield, once I started learning more about my hometown, Birchfield became a huge figure because his paintings, those haunted houses, what I'm trying to do in the book is explain what happens inside those houses. You know, he often has like a person looking out the window and the weird house and the sidewalk. Well, here, my goal is, okay, what's that person thinking? What's their life like? Because I grew up in one of those houses. Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question from Patty. She says, can you address why you may have featured mixed tattoo earlier in the book versus the early draft from what I remember? Getting in the nitty gritty.
Okay, well, Nick actually has a tattoo, who is the brother, of course, and featured, yeah, I don't know quite how to answer that, but maybe it changed. Yeah, that first chapter got rewritten 34 times, so things may have shifted around a little bit in the process. But the idea of that tattoo was that the family was concentrating on the tattoo that was on his leg rather than the leg itself that had been amputated. You know, did they keep the tattoo? Did he get to have his tattoo? And then we find out when Neal goes into the morgue and sees Nick's body, you know, if the tattoo is indeed intact. Yeah. So I was trying to time that, I guess, to answer that question. I was trying to pace the reader. I've been a little surprised how these things took time, you know, for, you know, to lead the reader. When you do a long piece like this, I mean, you want things to be not necessarily logically following themselves, but coming at points that might surprise the reader and delight them and make it an interesting process for them to go in and feel those feelings. Yeah.
What was the most challenging for you?
Staying with it over many years. Yeah. You know, and many times feeling like I could never finish the project. And, you know, I did a bunch, you know, I really, I often have people in the writing group say, you know, how do you learn this? I'm not a fiction writer. I can't write dialogue. And well, and you know, nobody's going to teach you. You have to some way find classes. So, I mean, back in 2014, 15, I was doing classes at UCLA, specifically advanced fiction writing classes, learning how to do dialogue. And yeah, and it's just a long process, you know what I mean? And something doesn't work, you throw it away. In fact, when we were looking for things to read today, I was thinking, oh God, I hope that piece is still in the book. You know, I hope that's still available to read, that the reader's actually going to get that, you know, because the book was called Buffalo. That was the working title. even in the writing classes I did in 2015. In fact, I thought the book would be out in 2016, 17 at the very latest, you know. So we got it out, August 15th, 2021. So yeah, it's new, it's fresh.
Oh, it's a new baby. It's a brand new baby.
It is a baby, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Wow. It also reminds me of Birchfield's life a little bit, where he was working at the paper company and getting an ulcer because he wasn't out painting, out being able to do his thing. I think you had a similar kind of thing because you're working as a PA and trying to write this book. And is that true? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's very true. And the whole first chapter is about what it's like to be a health professional and what it takes, and a clinician, I guess, as well.
Right, yeah.
He's a PA, and he's delighted in it, and he meets people, but it's definitely a difficult. He works in a basement, and so it's kind of gruesome working in a basement when you live in Santa Barbara. It's kind of not exactly. And you're there for 12 hours, and it talks about that in some depth. Yeah. Because there isn't much written about what it's like to be a doctor or a clinician, a PA, and I thought it would be interesting.
It was, yeah. No, I found that part very.
After 30 years of doing it, I thought it would be. I mean, you're right about what you know, I guess.
That's why I'm saying it's like a collage. There are all these different little bits and pieces of information that you can pick up. In fact, for Ron, who was looking for a little laugh, there's also a little X-rated part. I'm not going to ask you to read it, but there are little bits. No, you promised me? No. So just a alert, reader alert.
Well, we were talking about the music. Could I read that part about Rhiannon? Because the Rhiannon, when the couple goes off to find a restaurant, they find a restaurant in Elmwood area called. Sure. Because I think what I like about this, it's some way. It's about the same length as the Fleetwood Mac song Rhiannon, and it kind of, I don't know, it was a bright spot. And this was a later add-on to the book, that's pure fiction. I said, I know a Greek place around the corner on Elmwood. Think it's still there?
There are lots of Greek places, yeah.
Yeah. My guess it is. Things don't change much. Standing in Armstrong's vestibule, we bundled in scarves, wool caps, and gloves. I said, I've forgotten what a hassle it is to live here. Vic poked me in the side. Do I take that to mean you're not moving back? We laughed, and I pushed the door open against a fresh foot of snow. It blanketed everything. Feathery and unblemished, the sky was an inviting, vibrant blue. Vic said, this reminds me of Yosemite. I said, I've never heard that analogy. We locked arm, raised our boots high, and Vic broke into a goose step. She said, this is fun. Let's do the angel thing. I said, Armstrong's neighbors will think we're nuts. She plopped down on her back in a fresh, soft bed of snow, extended her arms, and made wings. She said, come on, it's New Year's Eve. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. I knelt and flipped over on my back and pitched out my arms, a squeaky cold powder reshuffled around my head. She said, this isn't so bad. Her face flushed and rosy. Both of us puffed big, white, steamy breaths. We dusted each other off and walked to the eatery, the Oracle of Delphi, and the lights were off. I said, see, it's still here. A man in a long gray overcoat and Russian fur cap with ear flaps was shoveling in the driveway. He motioned to us, pulled a long chain from his pocket, selected a key, and opened a padlock. He pulled back a rusty metal security gate with a jolt. Once inside, Vic didn't take off her coat. I said, planning to stay? After he turns the heat on, she said. I used to come here with my buddies after pickup basketball games. We'd meet at Baker Hall and play until dawn, then hang out and eat a huge breakfast. A Greek family ran the place. The clanging sounds of pots and pans came from the back. We heard a grill fire up. She said, don't get your hopes up. Looks like this guy is the cook and the waiter. 10 minutes later, a slim, short, dark man brought the menu. His eyes danced and he brandished a toothy smile as he said, you like Greek food? Very healthy Mediterranean food. I said, do you serve breakfast? Sure. Also delicious dolmades, moussaka, and kebab. You like grape leaves? We weren't sure you were open, I said. Everything's ready. Was that you out there shoveling in the driveway? He nodded. Without a winter coat and hat, he looked like a bird without feathers. I said, are you Greek? No, I am Ali from Jordan. This place mine now. Food good. He brought Vic's coffee and we ordered breakfast. Our meal consisted of stone cold pancakes and stringy scrambled eggs. A jukebox in the corner played Fleetwood Mac's Rhiannon. Ali surfaced. Everything okay? I said, it's cold. Let me take. We make it right. You like meze plate, hummus tzatziki, kamada olives, domates? Sure, I love it. Vic nodded enthusiastically. He said, first I bring you hot pita bread. Vic swayed her shoulders and sang, I love this song. Ollie's face brightened and his body twitched. You like Stevie Nicks? Very popular in Amman. Vic said, Stevie rocks. She's a witch. Ollie swiveled his head. Witch? You know, how she dances. Vic stood and twirled, holding each end of her scarf like a cape. Ollie laughed. That rhythm section, son of a bitch. Mick Fleetwood, big foot on bass drum. John McVie, holy shit, train coming down the track. He vocalized, kachu, 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 from the base of his throat. I said, they drive Stevie hard. You're right. That rhythm section has the bottom locked down. She rides it. I never thought of it that way. Vic said, that's why it's called Fleetwood Mac, but they're nothing without the witch and Christine. Ali Alaba. Ali wagged his head. I was there May 19th, 1980, Memorial Auditorium downtown, right here in Buffalo. He scampered back to the kitchen and brought back 2 vinyl albums, Fleetwood Mac and Rumors. He said, I play every day, worn out, skips a little. We retreated to the kitchen and we heard him conversing with someone, a female voice. A few minutes later, a steaming plate of pita bread arrived, searing to the touch. Then a meze platter with all as promised, plus tabbouleh and a thick hunk of feta cheese, all interlaced with vegetables, tomatoes, and dried fruit. My mouth watered. A petite young woman in bright traditional dress accompanied Ali. She bore a plate of baba ganoush and a broad smile, which danced all over her face, and she said, meze means welcome. Fleetwood Mac played on and on with both hands forgoing cutlery. Vic and I gorged ourselves. The young woman brought another basket and we mopped up every morsel. When we asked for the bill, it was a pittance for pancakes and eggs, not a sumptuous Mediterranean feast. When we stood to leave, the young woman came out from the back and bowed. There were bountiful goodbyes. We shook hands with Ali and promised to come back. We left a generous tip. Ali shook his head. I can't believe. Mick Fleetwood. Holy shit. Big tom-tom, rhythm section. Think of me when you hear. As we walked back to Armstrong's, I said, that was such a good meal and baklava for dessert. Vic put her hand on her belly. Heavenly, what a flaky crust. Do you think it was homemade? Of course. You can't buy anything like that in the store. I need a nap. But that's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the idea of interlacing the music, playing Rhiannon and then the knowledge of this man from another country, that the music brings us together in a very bountiful way. And I guess the book is kind of like a baba ganoush. It's like a Mediterranean meal. As I was telling Kate, that's kind of the analogy I would have for what the book is. You get a little plate of this, a little plate of that, a little pita bread. But if you're hungry, it's awfully good. Yeah.
And that's the nice thing too. I think Buffalo is known as a city of good neighbors. We welcome many immigrants here. And so it's very realistic the way, that happened. Is that real or not? It's hard. You're like, is that real? Is that not? What?
No, that was a fiction. I don't know where that, I got into Rhiannon, I started listening to all the different versions. And you know how Stevie does this at the end? The band is driving her. I mean, they're driving. Whatever's coming through her body is being driven by that big drum of Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and that bass. I mean, they are, and of course, Christine McVie is, the jazz pianist who's like, I mean, they're really holding her in kind of a cradle. And that's why I wanted to use that song.
By the way, Lindsey Buckingham is coming to Buffalo at the Riviera Theater for those who are into Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, I didn't mention Lindsey's great guitar in that song too.
Well,
but the idea of walking down the bottom, that's what I was trying to get across. Is the bottom is locked down, and when the bottom's locked down, the other people perform at their peak. Yeah.
I see another Q&A. Sure. Is there another question?
Yes, we do. And it's a big question. So Marianne asks, you mentioned many things about Buffalo, including architecture and art. What are your absolute favorite things about Buffalo? Best place to go in Buffalo, favorite food, best restaurant, favorite bookstore? Where do you make it a point to go even when you have a short trip here? And that's obviously, you know, after you come to the Birchfield, of course. So.
Yeah, the Birchfield, of course. Yeah, well, it would be Rust Belt books for sure. I mean, they're just so funky and weird, and I love poking around books. Elizabeth and I have just done a big death cleaning. We got rid of our office, and we literally gave 6,000 books to Planned Parenthood between our 2 doctorates and the book collections that we've had through our lives. So I guess I still like to poke around, but I'm no longer consuming in the way that I once did. So, but I don't know why. I'm in the middle of winter. I remember just being so pleased to find the crazy things you can find on the shelf there. And Talking Leaves is great. I mean, they're all there. I love those independent bookstores. My favorite place, I think, is Delaware Park, and I love visiting anything that has to do with Olmsted, anything that's been left behind of the circles and the pantheons, and just all the things that were part of Buffalo from 100 years ago are very powerful to me. The Buffalo Athletic Club is now LA Fitness or something. I grew up swimming in that pool. There's lots of mentions of it here. Even Johnny Weissmuller, there's a swimming adventure in the book about Johnny Weissmuller swimming in the Buffalo Athletic Club pool. And so that's true. That's true. Yeah. Those years they did water shows, and it was kind of like vaudeville. People would come in, and the BAC pool was the pool. I mean, that was like the masterwork of engineering. They had a little balcony, and
yeah, I know.
And I was a lifeguard at that pool, so I mean, I love going back, and I just can't wait to walk the streets again. Cynthia Van Ness, has a wonderful book about Buffalo architecture, so I just enjoy that so much. I'm just going to try to visit every one of those sites that she has in her book. She also has another book with Buffalo sayings, and I have some of that in the book as well. Famous sayings by Buffalonians, like how, yeah. You've been there, you've read it all, Kate. So thank you.
But what about the Bills? Oh my God, you're a huge Bills fan.
I am a Bills fan, and the thing I love the most is like the mini Woodstock that they do for the tailgate party. But I'm not sure that's going to happen this time around. Yeah. But I love that, and I've made great friends through that, and I love how interracial it is. I mean, it's a point where people can just love each other for being human beings, and dance to the shout song. They roll around on the ground, and everybody's drunk by 9 o'clock. I don't drink, as you know, but I just love the atmosphere. It's one of my favorite. Everybody cooks, they're preparing for days in advance, the kielbasa or something.
And then they go in and watch people beat each other up with.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But I don't normally go to the. I think that the tailgate party is the ultimate. So that was a great question. Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, as we're talking, I can just visualize. I'm Elmwood Avenue. I mean, I just love it. I just love walking down the street. Yeah,
oh, well, it's a different Buffalo. It'll be very interesting when you come, because Hurdle is now the new Elmwood-ish.
Yeah. And Kate and I grew up. Kate and I grew up on Hurdle, or very close to Hurdle.
Close to it, yeah.
Very close. I mean, that was our neighborhood. Yeah. Gosh, I hope I haven't read you guys to death. But,
yeah.
Those are all the Q&As that I had. So.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, everyone. I just want to say that I've listened. It was sort of like being a voyeur on 2, I won't say old, but dear friends, sharing their life experiences, reliving those life experiences and sharing them with all of us. So thank you, Kate, and thank you, Lawrence. And we will try to figure out how to make it possible. Lawrence, you and I will have that conversation. If we can find a time to have your books available and have them signed, if they're even going to be available at that time. But we'll talk about that, and then I'll share it with all our guests tonight. But I just want to share this one little thing that I heard one night when I couldn't sleep and watched the 11th Hour with Brian Williams. He closed by talking about Buffalo, New York, and how it had the name City of Good Neighbors, and he felt it truly was a place that welcomes all people, and how our city is growing again because of the influx of immigrants, and how much we appreciate their coming to live with us and building our city back to its glory days, and it will be there again. But thank you, everyone. I want to thank
thank you.
Michaela and thank Kate, and thank Lawrence. And this is the time when I generally remind people what's happening next. But sadly, I have to share that our September book club author, Dr. Christopher Kerr, I hope I'm pronouncing that
Kerr.
correctly, Kerr, thank you, is going to be curtailing all of his appointments for quite some time. So we will not have a September book club, but in October 2nd, as a matter of fact, we have a great big treat in store when we will be featuring the 2020 Barnes & Noble's Book of the Year, The World of Wonders, in Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments by Amy. And Michaela, you're going to pronounce her last name for me.
Her name
Michaela
is
knows
Amy.
her.
Yes, she was my professor at Fredonia State. Her name is Amy Nizuka Matatio.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
So if you think Skajakwada is difficult, she really can trump that one. So thank you, everyone. Good night, and I'll see you October 2nd. But you'll hear from me in regards to Lawrence's visit to Buffalo. So thank you and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.